The lavender shortbread tin struck my chest with surprising force, sending a scatter of buttery crumbs down my blouse. I stood frozen, stunned not by the sting of the impact, but by the realization of who had thrown it. My 48-year-old daughter, Sophia, stood across the table, her face red with fury, her arms still outstretched as if daring me to challenge her again. Around us, our extended family sat in a stunned silence, the Thanksgiving pot roast untouched, their eyes not on the aggressor, but on me, the 72-year-old mother who apparently deserved it. My name is Elizabeth Winters. I'm a retired librarian, a widow, and until recently, the quiet, dependable matriarch of a family that rarely saw me as anything more than a background figure, a cook, a babysitter, a blank checkbook in an old sweater. That all changed the day my daughter decided to throw a tin of cookies at me in front of the entire family. But let me tell you something important. It wasn't just the shortbread that cracked that evening. It was also the shell I had been living in for decades. This wasn't just about baked goods or bruised pride. It was the culmination of a long, painful pattern of disrespect and entitlement that had defined my relationship with my daughter for far too long. And it was finally time to draw a line, to stop swallowing insults with a smile, to stop letting my sacrifices be twisted into debts owed. You see, just 2 weeks before that chaotic dinner, I'd done something extraordinary, something for me. I had purchased my dream, a half-acre nursery on the edge of town, paid for entirely in cash, with money I'd saved over decades and a modest life insurance payout from my late husband, Thomas. It wasn't fancy. The greenhouse was in disrepair, the beds were overgrown, and the irrigation system barely sputtered. But it was mine. After years of living frugally, growing my own vegetables, patching old clothes, and turning down senior cruises my friends were posting about on Facebook, I had finally said yes to myself. And maybe, just maybe, that's what upset Sophia most. Not the nursery itself, but the fact that I had chosen to build a life of my own, one that didn't center around her. So when she summoned me, under the guise of a family meeting, and then announced without even blinking that I should hand my nursery over to her daughter, Melissa, I realized something bone deep. This wasn't a request. This was a coordinated ambush. And when I refused to hand over the only thing I'd truly claimed for myself, that's when the tin flew. This is the story of what came next, of how I finally stood up for myself, of how I uncovered decades of hidden betrayal, of how I, Elizabeth Winters, learned that it's never too late to say, enough. It was a lavender shortbread tin that finally broke me. It hit me square in the chest during Sunday dinner, sending crumbs scattering across my cardigan and silence crashing down over the room. My 48-year-old daughter, Sophia, had just hurled it at me in front of our entire extended family. I stood there, stunned, not by the force of the blow, but by the fact that no one, not one person, spoke up for me. Not even after she'd thrown baked goods at her 72-year-old mother. That moment wasn't just a tantrum. It was the boiling point of a lifetime of sacrifice, silence, and being treated like I was somehow less. Let me back up a bit. My name is Elizabeth Winters. I'm a widow, a mother, a grandmother, and now, after nearly 5 decades of putting everyone else first, I'm finally the proud owner of my dream, a little garden nursery tucked just outside of town. When my husband, Thomas, passed away 3 years ago, he left behind a modest life insurance policy. I didn't use it for vacations or to spruce up the house like others might have. Instead, I saved it along with every spare dollar I made working part-time at the library, while others in my retirement community were off on cruises and upgrading their SUVs. I was growing vegetables in my backyard, saying no to dinner invites, and learning greenhouse repair from YouTube. At long last, I scraped together $85,000, enough to buy the nursery outright. It was a little overgrown, and the greenhouse needed work, but it was mine. Every inch of soil, every cracked pane of glass, every weathered fence post, it was mine, and I was proud of it. So when Sophia called me one afternoon, inviting me to a family gathering, I didn't think much of it. She insisted I bring a batch of my lavender shortbread, the kind I used to bake when she was a little girl. I smiled and agreed, thinking it would be a lovely evening. But what I walked into that night wasn't a family dinner. It was an ambush. Sophia stood up after the meal, smiled like a talk show host, and began explaining that Melissa, my granddaughter, was moving back to town with her husband. They were looking for a fresh start, she said, and then looked right at me. As you all know, Mom recently bought a nursery, she announced. At her age, though, it's far too much work. But Melissa, she's always dreamed of running a garden center. So we thought, what better way for Mom to show her love and generosity than by giving it to Melissa? She said it with that same fake sweetness she always used when she wanted something big. I stared at her, speechless. My own daughter had just tried to guilt me into handing over the one thing I'd spent years building my dream on a silver platter, and she wanted me to smile while doing it. I stood up. My hands were shaking, not from age, but from fury. You want me to give Melissa my nursery? I asked slowly. The nursery I worked 2 jobs to afford. The one I bought with every cent I saved after your father died. The room was quiet, dead quiet. And then Sophia said something that will echo in my memory until the day I die. Don't be selfish, Mother. That's when she threw the tin. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I picked up my purse, crumbs still clinging to my blouse, and walked out the door. I left them all sitting there, staring at their plates like I was the one who had ruined dinner. When I got home, I didn't sleep. I went straight to my home office, opened the fireproof box Thomas had always insisted we keep, and pulled out every financial record I could find. For the first time in my life, I looked at the books not to help someone else, but to protect myself. What I found made my hands go cold. Over $200 Sun dollars in unpaid loans to Sophia and her family. Loans Thomas had made behind my back, $65,000 to help them buy their house. Another $25,000 for some boutique Sophia opened and failed to mention to me. Even $8,000 for a vacation I wasn't invited to because, as Sophia once said, someone has to watch the dog. I stared at the numbers and felt something shift inside me, not just anger but clarity. I wasn't just being asked to sacrifice for my family. I had already done it, quietly, constantly, and they still wanted more. Well, no more. The next day, I met with Martin, Thomas's old attorney, and laid out the documents. He was shocked not by the amounts, but by the fact that Sophia had signed every loan. They were legally binding, promissory notes, with interest. You have every right to demand repayment, he said, and so I did. I sent Sophia a formal demand letter. Within hours, my phone blew up, calls from relatives calling me cruel, messages from Sophia calling me vindictive. Even Melissa chimed in, begging me to stop tearing the family apart. But the part that broke my heart wasn't their anger. It was their complete inability to understand why I was doing this. I didn't want revenge. I wanted respect. I wanted them to see that I was a person, a woman who had worked hard, loved deeply, and deserved more than crumbs and insults. So I pressed forward. I refused to back down, and when Sophia threatened to make things ugly, I responded with calm. "You already did," I said. "You just didn't expect me to fight back. Because here's the thing about mothers like me, quiet, soft-spoken, always putting others first. We don't stay that way forever. Not when everything we've built is on the line. At 72 years old, I learned how to fight for myself. And let me tell you something, it's never too late to stand up and say, no more, not one more insult, not one more sacrifice, not one more lavender shortbread tin to the chest. From now on, I'm living life on my own terms, and it feels damn good. You're too old to handle it, Mother. Just give it to Melissa." Those were the words that cracked something inside me, not just because of what they meant, but because of who said them. My daughter, my own flesh and blood, the one I had sacrificed for, worked double shifts for, skipped doctor appointments for, and now, at 72, after finally carving out a small piece of happiness for myself, she stood across from me, demanding I hand it all over, as if I didn't matter anymore, as if I had become some fragile relic taking up space. Let me back up. Just 3 months before that day, I'd finally purchased a small half-acre nursery with a charming but slightly run-down greenhouse. I had saved up for it for years, pinching pennies, cutting coupons, working part-time at the library after my husband Thomas passed, while others in my retirement group were cruising to Alaska or remodeling kitchens. I was nursing a long-buried dream, a space to grow things again, to lose myself in soil and sunlight, to be someone more than a widow, a grandmother, a background character. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. Every inch of that nursery represented years of sacrifice and quiet hope, and I had big plans restoring the greenhouse, planting heirloom vegetables, creating space for local kids to learn about gardening. But apparently, that dream didn't fit into my daughter Sophia's idea of how a 72-year-old should live. It began innocently enough, or so I thought. Sophia invited me to what she called a family dinner. She even asked me to bring my lavender shortbread, the one recipe everyone still praises. That should have been my first warning. Sophia only ever uses sweet tones when she's plotting something. The moment I walked in, I sensed it. The air was too rehearsed, smiles too tight, and when everyone sat down, the charade began to unravel. First came the announcement that my granddaughter Melissa and her husband were moving back to town. Good news, truly. But then came the real reason for the gathering. They needed a project, a fresh start. And what better than a quaint little nursery already purchased and prepped? Sophia stood up, hands clasped, and said, "Mom, we all think it's best if you give the nursery to Melissa. You're at an age where it's just too much for you." I laughed at first, not because it was funny, but because I honestly believed it was a joke. But then I looked around the table, my brother-in-law William nodding solemnly, Melissa biting her lip, but not saying a word. Even my nephew chiming in with, "It's for the family." Aunt Liz, it was an ambush, a coordinated, manipulative ambush. I tried to stay calm, reminded them that I had paid for the nursery with my own money, that it was my dream. But Sophia's smile turned sharp. "You should be grateful anyone's even thinking about your future," she snapped. "At your age, it's selfish to cling to something you can't manage." And then came the shortbread tin. She flung it across the table, hitting me square in the chest. The cookies I'd baked by hand scattered across my cardigan and onto the floor. A hush fell over the room. No one helped me. No one defended me. They just watched. I walked out without another word. On the drive home, Something hardened in me. I had spent my whole life putting others first, especially Sophia. I gave up promotions to attend her recitals, took out loans to fund her education, and when she struggled financially, I opened my wallet again and again. But now she wanted to strip me of the one thing that was finally mine. That night, I opened the locked box Thomas had left for important papers. Inside were documents I had never bothered to study before: loan agreements, savings account logs, old checks. I discovered that over the years, we had lent Sophia and her husband over $200,000, none of it repaid. Money that could have funded my retirement, or bought a better property, or given me some cushion in old age. Instead, they had the audacity to say I didn't need it. I contacted a lawyer the next morning. What followed were weeks of legal back and forth. Sophia denied the loans were real, claimed her father gifted her the money, even tried to turn extended family against me, painting me as senile, bitter, ungrateful. But I didn't flinch. For once in my life, I didn't back down. I wasn't just protecting my nursery. I was reclaiming my worth. When Sophia realized she couldn't bully me into handing it over, she grew desperate. She accused me of turning Melissa against her, of tearing the family apart. But I stayed firm. This wasn't about revenge. It was about respect, something I had been denied for too long. Then something unexpected happened. Melissa came to the nursery alone. No makeup, no fancy coat, just jeans and an apology. She told me that all she'd really wanted was to spend time with me, to learn that it was Sophia who turned it into a power grab. For the first time, I saw a glimpse of the granddaughter I used to garden with when she was small, and I gave her a chance not as an heir, but as an apprentice. Weeks later, as the lawsuit moved forward, Sophia retaliated. The nursery was vandalized in the middle of the night, plants uprooted, glass smashed, the words "selfish old witch" spray painted across the greenhouse. Police found her designer scarf at the scene. I pressed charges. That was the breaking point. The community rallied around me. Neighbors showed up with gloves and wheelbarrows to help me replant. A group of seniors from my book club donated seedlings. Melissa scrubbed graffiti off the greenhouse with her bare hands. It wasn't just a garden anymore. It was a statement. When the dust settled, Sophia, under pressure from both the court and her crumbling reputation, finally offered an apology. Public, sincere, maybe, or maybe just survival. But it didn't matter. I accepted it. Not for her, but for me. Today, the nursery is thriving. Melissa works with me 3 days a week. We teach gardening classes, host weekend markets, laugh in the sun. Sophia and I remain distant. She makes her legal payments on time, sends polite cards on holidays, and that's enough. Because in the end, I kept what mattered, not just the land or the flowers, but my voice, my dignity. And if anyone ever asks whether it was worth it to stand my ground at 72, I'll tell them absolutely. It's never too late to protect your peace. When I got home that evening, lavender shortbread crumbs still clinging to my blouse, my heart pounding with disbelief and a bruise forming on my chest, I didn't cry. I didn't sit down to stew or vent to a friend. Instead, I walked straight into my home office, opened the bottom drawer of my old oak filing cabinet, and reached for the small key Thomas had left behind in a dusty ceramic bowl on his side of the dresser. That key opened the fireproof lockbox he insisted we keep for just in case. Well, just in case had finally come. Sophia had thrown a cookie tin at her 72-year-old mother because I said no to her demand. Yes, demand that I give up my dream nursery. The same nursery I'd saved $85,000 for. The same one I'd poured years of sacrifice into. Also, my granddaughter Melissa could play business owner while Sophia clapped from the sidelines. But that wasn't what lit the fire in my chest. What lit the fire was the years I'd bitten my tongue, the sacrifices I'd made quietly, the financial blind spots I'd chosen not to inspect too closely. So, I opened that lockbox. I spread out our old records, Thomas's meticulous stack of labeled folders, organized by year and subject, mortgage documents, utility bills, tax returns, savings bonds. And then, about 3 hours in, there it was, a single sheet labeled Home Down Payment Loan Sophia and Lucas, dated 15 years ago. My hands trembled as I read the details. Thomas had withdrawn $65,000 from our retirement savings to help them buy their house. Signed promissory note, interest rate, repayment schedule, not a gift, a loan, and they hadn't paid back a single cent. I kept going. $25,000 for a boutique business Sophia opened and closed within a year. $15,000 for Melissa's private high school. $8,000 for a family vacation to Hawaii. I wasn't invited to because, in Sophia's words, someone needs to stay and watch the dog. In total, over $200,000 our retirement savings gone. And not once, had Thomas or Sophia told me. She'd called me selfish. She'd said I didn't need the nursery. But she had no shame asking me to give up the only thing I had left, after quietly bleeding me dry for years. The next morning, I didn't bake. I didn't garden. I made a call. Martin Keller, please. Tell him Elizabeth Winters needs to speak with him urgently. Martin had been our family attorney for decades. We hadn't spoken since Thomas's funeral. But when I walked into his office, it was as if time folded over itself. Same old leather chairs, same oil painting of a fishing boat. He rose to greet me with a warmth I hadn't felt in months. I was so sorry to hear about Thomas. He said, "Thank you, Martin, but I'm here today about something else." I handed him the folder, one loan after another, each documented, signed. He reviewed them slowly, his face hardening. "Elizabeth, these are absolutely enforceable. And frankly, it's rare to see records this thorough. My husband was meticulous," I said, trying not to let the bitterness rise. Martin looked me in the eye. "As executor of Thomas's estate and the injured party, you have every right to pursue repayment. But family lawsuits can get messy." "I don't care if it gets messy," I replied. "They've had decades to do the right thing. Now they'll do it my way." He nodded, then leaned back. "Let's start with a formal demand letter. We'll give them 30 days to respond." The letter went out by certified mail. Within hours, Sophia was calling, screaming, raging, telling me I was ungrateful, vindictive, cruel. "You're destroying this family over money." "No," I said, my voice calm. "I'm saving what's left of my dignity." The calls kept coming, from relatives, from Melissa, from Lucas, each one a variation on the same theme: "You're overreacting. Let it go. Think about Melissa. Think about what Dad would want." But I did think about Thomas. I thought about the way his hands had started shaking near the end, how he'd sit up at night pretending to read while worrying about bills I didn't know existed. I thought about the loan statements I'd just uncovered and how he never told me. I'd trusted him. I'd trusted Sophia. I'd trusted that family meant support, not subtraction. Sophia's lawyer responded with a dismissive letter claiming the funds were gifts. Martin laughed when he read it. "She's bluffing," he said. "We'll file a lawsuit." We did, and that's when the tide began to turn. Sophia's mask slipped. Her phone calls turned colder. Her charm gave way to threats. You'll regret this. Mother, I'll make sure everyone sees you for who you really are. But I already knew who I was. I was the woman who'd sewn dresses by hand when we couldn't afford store-bought ones. The woman who skipped vacations so her daughter could have dance lessons. The woman who worked double shifts so her husband wouldn't worry. And now I was the woman standing up and saying enough. Enough lies. Enough guilt. Enough of being treated like I owed them the rest of my life. I didn't owe them my savings. I didn't owe them my nursery. I didn't owe them my silence. When Martin filed the lawsuit officially, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and said aloud, "You are not selfish. You are not cruel. You are reclaiming what's yours." It felt strange at first, saying those words, but the more I said them, the more I believed them. I wasn't just asking for repayment. I was asking for acknowledgement. I was demanding that my labor, decades of it, unpaid, unseen, be valued, that my future still mattered, that I was not invisible just because I had gray in my hair and softness in my voice. If they wanted to see what the old woman was capable of, they were about to find out. Because Elizabeth Winters had finally remembered her worth, and she wasn't backing down. You'd think that after raising a child, sacrificing for decades, and quietly supporting an entire family behind the scenes, the worst thing that could happen would be a bit of distance in old age, a few missed calls, maybe a forgotten birthday. But no, I was branded a villain, called selfish, crazy, and heartless. And why? Because I dared to ask my daughter to pay back what she owed. My name is Elizabeth. I'm 72 years old, and not too long ago, I did the unthinkable. I filed a lawsuit against my own daughter, Sophia. It began with Shortbread. Yes, Shortbread. One Sunday, in front of our extended family. Sophia, my 48-year-old daughter, threw a tin of lavender shortbread cookies at me. It hit me square in the chest. There I stood, a widow, cardigan dusted in crumbs, watching my family stare in stunned silence. Not at her for assaulting her mother, but at me, for refusing to hand over the nursery I had just purchased with my life savings. They said I was selfish, but selfish was watching me work part-time at the library, growing vegetables to save every cent, just to see Sophia ask me to gift my dream to her daughter, Melissa. Selfish was taking over $200,000 in loans over the years, from a house down payment to private school tuition, and never paying back a dime. That night, bruised in both body and spirit, I didn't cry. I went home, opened the fireproof lockbox Thomas had insisted we keep, and began combing through decades of financial records. I'd never been the numbers person in our marriage. Thomas was the organizer. And as I flipped through years of documents, a pattern began to emerge: loan agreements, promissory notes, signatures, terms. Sophia had borrowed $65,000 for her house, $25,000 for a boutique business that had failed years ago, another $15,000 for Melissa's schooling. There was even an $8,000 vacation I'd been excluded from because someone needed to watch the dog. Added up over $200,000, all from our retirement savings, all unpaid. I felt sick. I felt stupid. But mostly, I felt awake. The next morning, I made an appointment with Thomas's old attorney, Martin Keller, a kind man with a sharp legal mind and a gentle manner. He examined the papers carefully. "These are legally binding," he said. "You have every right to seek repayment." I remember gripping the arms of the chair. "Even if it's my daughter," he looked at me quietly, "especially if it's your daughter." So we drafted the demand letter, and when Sophia received it, she exploded, called me a traitor, accused me of ruining the family, said I'd chosen money over blood. The phones rang nonstop. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years were suddenly experts on elder behavior. William, my late husband's brother, told me to stop harassing a young couple. Melissa cried on the phone, asking how I could do this to them. Others messaged me with veiled warnings. What would people think if they found out you're suing your own child? But beneath the noise, there were whispers, quiet voices in the night. Elizabeth, you're doing the right thing. My sister-in-law Janet told me over the phone. Sophia's been bleeding you dry for years. A neighbor left a jar of homemade jam on my porch with a note. Stay strong. Grace, my old friend and now housemate, hugged me without a word. The family was split. Lines drawn, loyalties exposed, and for once, I didn't care. I'd spent my life being the bridge, the peacemaker, the one who kept her mouth shut for the sake of peace. Not anymore, not after decades of being everyone's backup plan, everyone's silent ATM. Sophia's attorney replied, claiming the loans were gifts. But the documents said otherwise, signed agreements with repayment terms and interest rates. Martin fired back with a firm response and an offer to mediate. Sophia refused. So we filed the lawsuit. I could feel the ground shifting. People who'd once praised me as gracious and dependable now called me cold. Friends looked the other way in the supermarket, but I held steady. The truth doesn't need applause. It only needs courage, and then a flicker of light. Melissa called, not as my enemy, but as a granddaughter. Grandma, she whispered, I didn't know Mom was going to demand the nursery. I just wanted to learn from you, to garden with you. Her voice cracked. I'm sorry. She came to the nursery the next day, in jeans and a t-shirt, with no makeup, no entitlement. She got her hands dirty, dug roots, replanted beds, watered seedlings, and each time she looked up at me, it wasn't with guilt, but with effort. That mattered. As the lawsuit gained traction, Sophia grew desperate. Her financial records were unraveling under scrutiny. Old debts, business failures, tax issues. When her business was hit with a $300,000 audit penalty, she snapped. One night, she vandalized my nursery, pulled plants, tore irrigation pipes, spray-painted selfish old witch across my greenhouse. I didn't weep. I called the police. When they asked, do you want to press charges? I said, yes. The family lost their minds. William screamed at me over the phone. You had her arrested. She committed a crime. I said, steady. Melissa cried when she saw the damage. She helped me replant. A local teen named Jaden offered to volunteer. My neighbors pitched in. Former customers brought seedlings. Even Lucas, Sophia's husband, came with a settlement offer. And slowly, the tide began to turn. Sophia stood in front of the same relatives who once judged me and read a public apology, one I demanded be part of our settlement. She admitted the disrespect, the manipulation, the vandalism. She looked me in the eye and said, I'm sorry. Mom, I believed her, not because of the words, but because for once she had no control over the outcome. 6 months later, the nursery is thriving. Melissa works with me part-time. Jaden's now my assistant. I teach senior gardening classes and ship heirloom seeds nationwide. I have my peace, my rhythm, my purpose. Sophia and I are civil, but distant. She sends birthday cards now, makes her monthly payments on time. We may never be close, and that's okay, because I've already reclaimed something far more precious than her affection, my dignity. And every morning, as I open the greenhouse, coffee in hand, I say to myself, it's never too late to stand up. It's never too late to be seen. It's never too late to bloom. I arrived at the nursery just after sunrise, expecting the silence of a garden asleep. Instead, I was greeted by the low hum of voices, the scrape of rakes, and the scent of overturned soil. My heart caught in my throat as I saw them neighbors, old friends, even strangers already hard at work among the ruined beds and torn irrigation lines. It had only been 2 days since the vandalism, 2 days since I stood in that greenhouse, staring at red spray paint that screamed, "Selfish old witch," across the glass panels I had lovingly cleaned just weeks before. 2 days since I signed the police report with trembling hands and watched as they logged my daughter's scarf into evidence. I never imagined Sophia would go that far. But then again, I never imagined I'd find myself rebuilding the life she tried to destroy with the help of the very community I thought I'd lost touch with. "Elizabeth, we heard what happened," Janet said, straightening from a bed of flattened marigolds. Her gardening gloves were stained, her face damp with sweat, but her smile was bright. "We thought you could use a few extra hands." Janet, my sister-in-law, had once stood silently by Sophia's side at family gatherings, and now she was here, dirt under her nails, replanting what Sophia had ripped from the ground. Behind her, I saw David Chin, Lucas's former business partner, unloading trays of heirloom tomatoes from his truck. "These are from my garden," he told me, his voice steady. "I know it's not much, but I thought they could help fill in the gaps." Not much. Those tomatoes were the first green shoots of hope I'd seen since the night of the break-in. Each one said, "We see you. We believe in what you're doing. You're not alone." Throughout the day, more arrived. Retirees from my book club, a teenage boy I barely knew, whose grandfather had bought seedlings here before I owned the place. A pair of young women from the farmer's market who offered to repaint the ruined greenhouse wall. I didn't ask them to come. They just did. By late afternoon, my nursery was transformed, not fully restored. No, some damage ran deep, but it was no longer a place of destruction. It was a work site of resilience, a community effort. That night, I sat on the edge of a low brick wall, watching the sky soften to lavender. My knees ached, my hands were raw, but my spirit soared. The next morning, the call came. "Elizabeth, we've just heard from Sophia's attorney. Martin, my lawyer, said they're accepting the full terms of your settlement, property transfer, monthly payments, public apology, all of it." I closed my eyes, letting that truth wash over me. After everything after the ambush, the thrown shortbread tin, the lawsuit, and now this act of cruelty, Sophia was finally surrendering. "It's the criminal charges," Martin continued. "They're serious, and with the media coverage, it's affecting their tax case, too. They need this to go away." I nodded slowly. "Let's proceed. Let's end this." And we did. A week later, the family gathered in a private room at a downtown restaurant, the same people who had witnessed Sophia scream at me across the dining table, accuse me of selfishness, and demand I hand over the nursery to Melissa. Now. They sat in awkward silence as Sophia read aloud from a prepared statement. Her voice was thinner than I remembered. Her eyes ringed with shadows. "I apologize to my mother, Elizabeth Winters," she read, hands trembling, "for my behavior at the family dinner, for the vandalism, and for the financial burdens I placed upon my parents over the years." She paused, then looked up. I was wrong. She said, "The room remained still. I didn't speak right away. I didn't need to. For once, the silence worked in my favor. When I did respond, my voice was quiet, Steady. Thank you. Sophia, I accept your apology. And just like that, it was over. The conflict that had consumed our family for months settled with a handshake, a signature, and words I had longed to hear but never expected to receive. Sophia and I may never be close again. Some damage can't be undone, but we were no longer enemies. That was enough for now. Back at the nursery, Melissa showed up early one morning with a tray of seedlings and a shy smile. She'd been working with me a few days each week, digging, weeding, asking questions I once thought she'd never care to ask. I found some old terracotta pots in Dad's shed, she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Thought we could use them for succulents. I smiled. Bring them in. Let's put them to work. She did, and so did I. The nursery continues to bloom. Jaden, the teen I hired before the sabotage, is now my assistant manager. Melissa runs our weekend propagation booth and manages the nursery's Instagram account skills. I never had, but now deeply appreciate. We're even holding gardening classes on Tuesdays for local seniors. Turns out, sharing my decades of know-how brings a joy I hadn't expected. People listen, they laugh, they lean in when I show them how to properly prune a rose bush or prepare compost tea. For the first time in a long while, I feel needed not out of obligation, but out of respect. Sophia sends her checks on time. She also sends birthday cards and updates on her therapy sessions. We're civil, and that's enough. Sometimes, while I'm potting seedlings or teaching a class, I remember that shortbread tin, how it struck my chest, how the crumbs clung to my cardigan. I remember the pain, the betrayal, the disbelief. But then I look around. I see the greenhouse filled with light. I hear the hum of conversation and the rustle of leaves in the wind. And I know I didn't just rebuild a nursery. I reclaimed my life, because in the end, it wasn't just about dirt and plants. It was about standing up, speaking out, and believing finally that I was worth defending. And here, in this half-acre of soil and sunlight, I did just that. I used to think the worst thing a child could do was throw a tin of cookies at their mother. That was before I stood in the cold dark, surrounded by police tape, and watched officers take photos of what was left of my dream. It was just after 3 a.m. when the phone rang, the kind of call you never want at that hour. "Miss Winters," the voice said, calm but firm. "This is Officer Kendrick from the police department. There's been an incident at your nursery." The drive over was a blur. My heart pounded in my ears the entire way, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. The moment I turned into the gravel lot and saw the flashing lights reflecting off the greenhouse glass, I knew. Sophia had done it, my daughter, my own flesh and blood. Officer Kendrick met me at the gate. She was young, steady-eyed, and trying her best to be kind. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "There's been some extensive damage." She wasn't exaggerating. The garden beds I'd spent weeks restoring were torn up, soil dumped out like it was garbage, rows of plants my babies yanked from their containers, roots exposed to the cold. The irrigation system I'd spent my savings repairing was slashed open, pipes mangled, and then there was the spray paint bright red, scrawled across the front of the greenhouse, "Selfish Old Witch." It was like something out of a movie. Except this was my life, my nursery, my dream that I had built from the ground up at 72 years old, all destroyed in a single night of anger. "We found this near the fence," Officer Kendrick said, holding up an evidence bag. Inside it was a silk scarf, one I recognized immediately. I'd given it to Sophia 2 Christmases ago. I closed my eyes. It wasn't just vandalism. It was personal. It was war. I want to press charges, I said. My voice didn't shake. I was done being afraid. The news spread fast. By noon, the whole town knew. Not just that my nursery had been vandalized, but that my daughter had been arrested for it. The phones didn't stop ringing. William, my brother-in-law, called first. You had her arrested, he bellowed. Your own daughter. No, I said calmly. She committed a crime. The police arrested her, but not everyone called to criticize. At 2:00 that afternoon, I looked up from sorting broken pots when a familiar car pulled into the lot. Janet, William's wife, stepped out with gardening gloves already on. He doesn't know I'm here, she said, smiling as she pulled a rake from the back seat. But I do what's right, not what keeps the peace. Soon, others followed. David Chin, Lucas's former business partner, showed up with a flat of heirloom tomatoes. Thought you could use some replacements, he said simply. Neighbors from my retirement community brought cookies, tools, even extra hands. Even Jaden, the teenager I'd hired to help after school, showed up without being asked. You don't leave good people behind, he said, voice cracking just a little. By sundown, what had started as a crime scene looked more like a community potluck. We weren't done far from it, but we'd started something stronger than the rage Sophia left behind. 2 days later, I got the call I'd been waiting for. Elizabeth Martin, my lawyer, said, Sophia's attorney has agreed to settle all of your terms property, monthly payments, and most importantly, the public apology. It should have felt like victory, but all I felt was tired, relieved. Yes, but tired in that deep, soul-weary way that only family can leave you. The settlement gathering was held at a quiet restaurant, in a private room where the first family ambush had taken place months before. The same faces stared back at me, Melissa, her husband, William, my extended family. Sophia looked like a ghost of herself. Makeup couldn't hide the puffiness around her eyes, the way her expensive blazer hung too loose on her frame. Lucas sat beside her, face pale but composed. Martin read the terms. Then it was her turn. She stood trembling and read a prepared statement. I, Sophia Winters Dowell, apologize to my mother, Elizabeth Winters, for my behavior at the family dinner. I apologize for the vandalism, for the years of disrespect, and for the financial burden I placed on her. She looked up. Her eyes found mine. I'm sorry, Mom. I was wrong. I didn't speak for a moment. I searched her face, not for lies. I was past caring about that, but for something real. And in that second, I saw it. Not remorse for the consequences, not shame for being caught. I saw regret. Thank you, I said softly. I accept your apology. And that was it. The paperwork was signed. The room emptied. Sophia approached me one last time. Do you think we could ever rebuild our relationship, she asked. That depends on you, I said. Words are easy. Actions take work. Today, 6 months later, my nursery is flourishing. Melissa comes by every week. She's learning, helping, growing into her own person, one who reminds me more of myself than I ever expected. Jaden is now assistant manager. We laugh a lot. We plant even more. And Sophia. She makes her payments. She sends holiday cards. We are not close, but we are civil. And maybe, for now, that's enough. Because at 72, I finally learned the most powerful lesson of all. It's never too late to grow something beautiful from broken ground, even if that something is yourself. In the quiet months that followed the storm, my nursery became more than a place of soil and seedlings. It became my sanctuary, a space where healing took root alongside the flowers. I watched Melissa thrive with every planting session, her hands learning the language of care that no textbook could teach. We rarely spoke of Sophia. Some silences are wiser than words. The lawsuit had been settled, the apology delivered, and slowly, a new rhythm returned to my life. I no longer walked with the weight of proving my worth to those who refused to see it. Instead, I moved with purpose, tending not just to plants, but to the woman I had forgotten I could be. One afternoon, as I was trimming back a row of daisies, Melissa turned to me and said, "Grandma, I want to be strong like you." That's when I realized everything I endured, every heartbreak, had bloomed into something worth passing on. I wasn't just rebuilding a nursery, I was restoring a legacy. Sometimes the people we love the most are the ones who wound us the deepest, but we are not obligated to carry their pain forever. Respect must be earned, even from family, and love, real love, doesn't ask you to give up your dignity to keep the peace. If you've ever been made to feel small in your own home, I want you to hear this. It is never too late to stand tall. You deserve peace. You deserve respect. You deserve a life that belongs to you. Have you ever had to choose between family and self-worth? Share your story in the comments. I read every word. And if this touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe. Your journey matters. Let's walk it together.